So my role is basically going to be just monitoring conversation. I really want this to be about people airing ideas, concerns, and various types of discussion. Somebody has very kindly written down some pet peeves already, which is good progress. So we do have a list. Oh, actually, no, I have a very important announcement, which is that we have MatPlotLib stickers. Unfortunately, I've given all of mine out. Oh, perfect. They look like this. Mike Dropboom sorted these out for us, so please help yourself. They're free. What was I saying? Oh, yes, we have a list of MEPs on the GitHub wiki, so if you have your laptop with you, you can look at the list and make contributions as to what you think we should do about them. Yes, question?
Should someone take notes?
Should someone take notes? Does anybody want to volunteer to take notes? If not, oh.
I'd also like to say this whole thing will be recorded and posted on YouTube for further watching if you want.
Oh, okay, that's a good piece of information because there's only one microphone. Right. Is that correct?
The AV people are getting another one.
Okay, perfect. So about my previous comment about airing concerns and ideas, prior to doing that, you should acquire a microphone. Until then, feel free to come up and speak. If this is nerve-wracking to you, then we have a portable one coming soon. So maybe I should get the list out and maybe start with MEPs, or if anybody wants to start with something on the board or anything they have pent up inside, we can start that way.
Can you refactor all of the backends, the GUI backend stuff, fellas?
Can you repeat that, Tom?
Refactor the GUI backends.
Refactor the GUI backends.
And rip MatPlot out of them.
And rip MatPlot out of them.
Well, what part of the GUI backend need, what about the GUI backend that needs to be refactored? Like, what limitations are you running into?
The fact that like the figure managers, which have all the logic for making a nice pop-up window, and where in your GUI of choice, is all tied into PyPlot at this point. So you want to use it for embedding, you inherit PyPlot, right? And like we have all that code there, it's just a little too tangled. We took the PyPlot out. Figure manager now becomes an incredibly useful thing for embedding.
So there's the other aspect that is an issue that has been raised with the Mac OS X, the Cocoa Ag backend, that was pointed out that we're not doing the event loop correctly, or at least it's not flexible enough. The backend structure is not flexible enough that we can accommodate different kinds of event loop architectures. So that's another refactor point that needs to be looked into.
Okay, so the TLDR of that discussion was that the figure manager should do one thing and not involve PyPlot. It should manage figures, just so we have it recorded. Who doesn't use MatPlotLib here? Okay. Who has used other alternatives to MatPlotLib, like Plotly and ggplot and... Okay. Here's a perhaps contentious question. Is there anything in those packages that you really like that you use instead of MatPlotLib that you would like to see in MatPlotLib? That might be a good question.
Default styling.
Use the voice loud enough.
So it's any way to have the default themes and so you could just import default themes that you could like. Certainly you just import Cbond just so that I can get the Cbond styling on my MatPlotLib rather than go and customize my own RC file kind of stuff.
Should I update you on the status of the art about that, or state of the art about that?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
So this hasn't made it into a release yet, but Tony Yu over the past year has done a lot of work on that. There's the next version will contain a styling framework where styles are sort of written into a file format that can be, and you can share these styles with other people, and you can put at the top of your thing, use style whatever. It's going to ship with a few styles. We haven't changed any of the default styles because that turns out to be really problematic with backward compatibility. But we're going to ship some much nicer styles that people hopefully will start to use by default for their new plots going forward.
And to build on top of that, what we're going to start doing is, in order to alleviate the problem of backward compatibility and forward compatibility, is that we will start having more logical RC style files that will represent the current style, the old such and such a version style, and such. So that way, operational code and stuff, which is of a concern, can go ahead and explicitly state, I want to be using the current style, or I want to be using this particular version style. That way, when they move forward, or they can go ahead and update their code and have less concern of it breaking their plots. So they can get the new features, but the appearance of their plots will still appear the same. So.
So the default style blows in MatPlotLib. Right. So my opinion is that we should be changing it. I don't think we should be sticking with the style that we have right now. I think it should be possible for people. Changing version isn't a common thing, right? We don't release that often, but it's a bit common thing. So as a user, it should be possible to go back and say, you know what, I'm updating the version and I still want that really sucky style. I really need that, right? Yeah. People like their own styles, right? But I don't think we should be afraid of changing styles, so long as it's possible for people, when they do update their version, to kind of go back to what it was, I guess.
That's going to be entirely the point of having these logical styles, so that it frees us, the developers, of the burden of wanting to maintain backwards compatibility. Is that we not now, but we will soon, when we fully have the framework working, we will have the ability to give users of our code the way to explicitly state, I need to stay on this style for whatever reason. And that way we have more freedom to make changes each version to improve the look and appearance of MatPlotLib.
Nell, do you have a...
Yeah, just a quick comment about this. So I sort of agree when it comes to colors. So I don't know how far you want to push this, but when it comes to ticks, this for me is important to keep backward compatible, because I have, for example, just a series of scripts that I use for my figures in my papers, and if you start changing this, it actually starts looking very different, and you can interpret things differently. So, in terms of color, I personally don't care. I never use the jet color map. I don't think it's a big deal if the plots have different colors or different line styles. But in terms of whether it starts messing with the interpretation, I think this is something which we should be careful.
But if you can flick a switch and get back to the behavior that you had previously, flicking a switch once you've done a whole version update is kind of minor.
It depends how much plots you have, and when you're writing your PhD and you've got 4 years old code and you want to regenerate your plot, you probably don't want to spend much time on it.
Can you just give an example of what I don't think I understand?
So what I mean is, if you start adding space around, so this is something I actually explicitly add to my plot, so all of this doesn't really apply to me, but adding space or adding ticks, this could change, or the spacing between ticks, so this could change It's not a really big change, but it could change the way. And you could, because a lot of, so when I do a figure for paper, I spend a lot of time customizing, the space, and if I have to do this again, I mean, it is a day of work.
But that's because the defaults blow.
No, I think, no.
Well,
Because when you do a plot, you actually need to customize it.
Yeah.
I think-
For those who were in my tutorial yesterday, remember there was an entire section going what are ticks, tick marks, tick locations, and tickers. You're talking about the number of ticks.
Yeah.
So you're not talking about the tick lines themselves.
No,
You're
no,
talking
no.
about, so that would be something that would be affected by the styles that could be maintained or whatever. But you're absolutely right. The tick locators or the tickers are going, those are sort of more substantial type of changes that can be an issue for some people because they may have been totally used to 5 ticks showing up every single time, and then now we go and change some default in the locator, and now there's 6 of them.
Ryan, you have a question?
So, I agree. MatPlotLib's look default out of the box is crap. But for all the people you think complain about the look and feel right now, if you break how that comes out in a minor release, it will dwarf that number of people. 2.0, I think it's a reasonable time to change something like that. You do it on 1.x, you're insane. Everybody deals with the lack of aesthetics in their own way, and so we've all learned to deal with it. And so a lot of the solutions we have for these depend on how the current thing operates, and then we adjust to that. If you go and change those, you're going to break spacing where, I've tuned spacing between subplots so that you can fit things properly. And I don't think that's something you even want to consider on a small version where I think the contract we have with the user is 1.4 to 1.5 to 1.6 is not going to change my scripts. I think we do need to change it at some point, but I think it's enough to just be able to say, hey, out of the box, first line in the import is import a style that doesn't suck. And I think that's good enough to get it moving forward, and then someday we could say, hey, now that everyone's used to this and has grown to that can become the implicit, and then you opt in. But you've got to have a long lead time on that. And while we don't release that often, I think that's an argument in leaving it the way it is, since we don't release that often, we're not giving people that long a lead on these things. Things like, that's a whole different issue, but I think that, I think the right solution is we don't break in a minor release. You can't break functionality.
And we had a question here, the fellow with the curly hair, or no?
Basically, a very similar look.
You are just echoing his comments? Okay. Oh, sorry, yes, the gentleman there. With his hand up.
Hi, I have a totally different sort of question or comment. I use big raster data sets, so for me MatPlotLib is very useful, but I often have to find workarounds to deal with the amount of, say, memory the PC wants to use, or I have to resample the raster data set at different scales. And I've noticed that there are 1 or 2 libraries out there that try to deal with these big data sets more efficiently with memory, or they have slightly different functionality, but in reality they're all inferior to MatPlotLib. And I kind of would like to see, at least with commands like IAMShow or something like that, to have a little bit more ability to deal with large data sets that are, grids, rasters, or whatever. That's my request.
So, actually, I have a response. So, are you talking about dealing with data that's distributed across multiple cores or nodes? Or do you just mean be more memory efficient? Be more memory efficient?
I think we have one of the things.
Actually, Ben, can you give him the mic?
So I completely agree, and this is, in my opinion, one of the major kind of structural things that at least affects me the most with MatPlotLib. I deal a lot with very large unsigned 8-bit integer images, essentially a lot of seismic data, and so As it currently stands, everything's converted over to a floating point 3-band RGB image, and there are multiple copies of that stored in memory every time you use something like IMShow. And you can get around it, and there's things like, was it MPL Modest Image or Modest Image? I forget who wrote that. Chris Beaumont, maybe? I don't remember. Someone has written a couple of different things. But the point being, the way MatPlotLib currently handles images is it treats everything as though we're just going to go to a 3-band floating point. And if you're dealing with a really large unsigned 8-bit integer, it's a very inefficient way to do it. And I think it's just a matter, it's all C code, so it's, I think that's part of why no one's touched it in a while. But I think that's the potential to really speed things up and make things a lot more memory efficient is in the image handling base.
I think one of the issues here is that it's not clear. So yes, I agree with you. I think it's not clear. Some of the MatPlotLib plotting functions make a promise not to change the input array. They make a promise not to destroy your data when you pass it. Some of them do, but it's yeah. So it's like, do we copy and then make a promise to the user that we don't destroy their data, or do we not copy and then say, look, you're going to pass me this thing. I now have free will to do whatever I want with it. So I think you're right, but I think we need to make a decision about how to be consistent with that. Or just make one copy, yeah.
IMShow right now, last time still also checked, but writing 3 copies.
Yeah, okay. IMShow makes 3 copies.
Yeah, effectively makes 3 copies of the floating, because it has, every time you display coordinates, it keeps
Yeah, I understand. Does anybody have a comeback to that? I know you have your hand up. Actually, Ben, this guy in the red stripy shirt has his hand up first. Yeah.
Red stripy shirt? Yeah, okay.
It's great having a lackey that can hand the microphone around.
I guess first off, thanks to all the developers. It's a very useful library. I use it for scientific plots, as many people do here. One of the things that's a theme, I think, as part of this meeting is reproducibility of scientific results. And it would be very useful if one could define some metadata, perhaps in a Python dictionary, things like code version and all the inputs that went into making the scientific result, and then have that stored as metadata in the output images that MatPlotLib creates. So for instance, in the PNG attributes or in the EPS, just in comments or something, just so you have that whole chain of reproducibility from your simulation code to your output to your the figures themselves that you create. So I don't know if there's anything like that. You could hack it together with a whole bunch of different libraries and treating each one of those separately, but if this were functionality within MatPlotLib that you could just supply a dictionary and say, here's metadata that I want attached to a figure, that keeps sort of the scientific chain intact.
I think something like that is definitely feasible to at least, as a start, just go in the direction of opening up access to some, because not all file formats support EXIF data and such like that, but some of them do. And so,
like EPS just comments in that.
Exactly. And so therefore, right now as the design stands, we completely prevent any access to the back-end file formats, and therefore you cannot pass any of this additional data if you want to. And so that's probably a very reasonable feature to add into the next release. When I say next, there's an upcoming 1.4 release. We're starting the RC process rules. So when I say next, I mean 1.5. So, yeah.
Yeah, I came up here because I didn't want to make you walk over. We should probably look at what FigStore is doing, because they've thought a lot about the metadata around figures and making them permanently referenceable and stuff. I don't know if they're doing anything with the files as well, but it'd be nice to kind of piggyback, on some of the.
Stumble across figures from 2 years ago that we'd love to remember how we made.
Right, exactly. No, I think it's a great idea.
And then also, building on top of that, we may want to see what sort of standards there are for specifying that sort of information. But I mean, right now, as it stands at the first iteration, I would see it just simply being a dictionary that would get passed and just stored as is, something like that. And maybe if it was in comments, it would be a JSON format. If it was EXIF, it would be the EXIF, stuff like that. So I think that is a fantastic feature request to make.
This gentleman, purple shirt, had a question. Can you put your hand up again?
Please
Yep.
wave your hand like crazy.
Him. Waving. There.
Sorry, just to, for one brief moment, go back to that memory efficiency thing. One of the things that I did in some code that I've used is sometimes all you want to do is look at your data. Okay, you don't necessarily need to print it out or anything like that. And so, what I found a routine on the internet, and I forget who wrote it, but it was really quite cool. What they did is they did a function where the initial data that goes in gets resampled to what you're really going to see on the screen. I mean, if I've got a grid that's 6,000 by 6,000 cells, but the screen is not going to show me that. It's probably going to have 600 by 600. So when the data gets loaded formally into MatPlotLib for that particular instance, it only needs a much smaller amount of memory to be able to show me what I want to see. And then within your library, all the zoom functions and everything worked anyway. So you can look at your massive image, but it's very quick, and then you can be zooming in and whatever you want. The point is that I had to get an external routine to do that, but that sort of thing would probably be pretty easy to do without having to rework entire memory models, but it would make things a little bit sort of neater and more efficient for end users in the short term.
I think some of the line plots already do that. Is that right, Mike?
So yeah, the line plots, they simplify.
We simplify
modifying
paths.
the original.
Okay.
So, but the issue here that we're talking about is, in particular, you talk about IM show and P color,
Okay.
maybe. So, I have looked into some of that, and part of the issue is with the way how MatPlotLib is currently structured, and its design goals is meant to address a very general audience, and so when we pass in the array, the 2D array of image information, that data is then immediately converted into colors, which, by the way, I think is an absolute mistake. We should wait until we're about ready to render to make them into colors. That way you can change the color map and stuff like that. But at that point, if we were to if we were to only keep a resampled version of the image, when somebody's in an interactive mode, do we have to hold on to the reference to the original data array? Right now, we don't hold on to the reference to that, because in order to handle panning and zooming, we would have to hold on to the original array, which, for all we know, the user of IMShow have made changes to that array after the fact. So one of the things that I have as number 4 there, that axes is a complete mess, goes into a little bit what I want to be going towards in the future, which is to support multiple front-end interfaces. And one of the front-end interfaces would be, we'll keep PyPlot, we'll keep PyLab, but then have a plot. Yes, I know. Bring your rotten vegetables and such. Yes, we would have.
Ben, I think that's a separate issue.
Yeah,
I agree.
Can you give the microphone to this person over here? He has a question. Thank you.
But I'm talking about having plot objects, and that plot object would then explicitly hold that data, and so it would be known as understood that way.
I'll make a comment first. So regarding your image question, it's actually fairly easy to write a subclass of a MatPlotLib axes image.
Can you put the microphone close?
Yeah, sure. It's fairly easy to make a subclass of MatPlotLib's axes image, and basically you can do whatever you want with that data and render that as you wish. So I have a demo of an axes image which goes and gets image data from the web, actually, from Google Tiles. So I'd be more than happy to talk to you about that afterwards.
Okay, this person here, and you have one, and I'm trying to keep, and you have one too. Okay.
Yeah, this is related to the question earlier about the fellow in the stripy shirt, I think you said. It's kind of the opposite of that, which is keeping more data around in figure calls. So I recently made a PR to MatPlotLib to have just kind of manipulate the container objects that you use to just keep the user calls for functions. The reason that might be useful is that there's a lot of kind of libraries that are trying to use MatPlotLib figures like MPL exporter and from Plotly, and it's of interest to us too to be able to take maybe say a heat map that was made with a ton of data that gets rendered in MatPlotLib, but then you want to send that online and have the figure and the data sourced in the same location. So if you had a switch or something in some of the function calls, this is just one way that I suggested, then it would just stick these little container objects that are just stuck to the axes. So when some other function wants to crawl a MatPlotLib figure, it can find that original user data, and it also isn't something that you guys would reference, so if a user changes that data, it doesn't mess with your figure. But if something needs to leverage it later, it's there. And then it's also a switch, so if it's this huge amount of memory, you don't have to save it and take up extra space on your computer. So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to bring that topic up, and it seemed like we were talking about it right now.
He actually answered my question. So.
Oh, he did? Okay, so there was the guy with the curly hair, and then this person here afterwards.
I saw him first.
Hi, will it ever be in the cards to have a completely interactive image where you could double click on an axis or a title and change fonts?
Oh my god, I can't believe how many times that question's been asked. Yeah, Mike, do you want to weigh in? That's probably one of the most requested.
Yeah, I'm sure you can imagine that's a big question. It's sort of part of the original design of MatPlotLib that the script that generates the plot is the plot format. That you would have all of the power of Python and, procedural programming in order to generate your plot. The problem with that is you don't really have a declarative way of describing the plot. It exists in memory, but that's never really been part of the design and the interface to MatPlotLib. Besides just the interactive GUI thing, the other shortcoming of that is it makes it hard to take a MatPlotLib plot and turn it into a Plotly plot. Plotly takes the alternative approach. They don't have really a programmatic interface to making a plot. They have a very declarative, it's JSON or something, right? Isn't it? So it doesn't have any, anything programmatic about it. So it just turns out to be a very hard problem to go from where we are to there. Because, for instance, some of our plots, like histogram, it calculates the histogram, turns it into basically a bar plot, and the original data, the connection to that original data is lost. So you couldn't therefore go in and click and adjust your binning or something like that, because it's just gone. So there's a lot of things of that nature, just tons and tons of little paper cuts that make it hard to do that. Should it or could it or whatever is a bigger question, but it's an enormous undertaking. Maybe.
At least with the Qt backend, there's I think, axis editor or figure editor that you can't double click on the title, but it gives you all the drop down boxes to change all of that while you're looking at it.
The drop down boxes leading to the styles?
No, it's like, you can set the axis title, the axis labels. It gives you access to all the lines. You can change the line colors, from the GUI. So it's not, it's not fully, double click on it magical, but you can still get to it.
Actually, I'd actually like to say something regarding this. I think in addition to your point, I would really like it if we had this. So I certainly think it would be easier to say adjust the axes limits by dragging, but changing things like fonts and the bins and all that stuff is a lot more difficult. I mean, I'm not saying we should do it piecemeal, but there are other issues here. But if you could change the axes limits and the placement of the tick labels and things, I think it would be really useful to have a button that says, or as you're editing, record the actions you do, and then save a Python script that will regenerate that figure. Does that make sense? Nell, do you want to?
Yeah, so just a quick comment. So some of you may be familiar with Mayavi. So it's like a 3D plotting library that does this.
Closer.
So you can modify the plot and then you can save it as a Python script. Now in practice, I don't know anyone who does this because the code it generates, it's just terrible. You can't do anything with it. I mean, if you want to change it, it's just awful. So yeah, I'm a bit skeptic on whether, like, it would be nice to be able to do this, then just to save it as a PNG, but having code to reuse it's hard. So.
I think one of the limitations right now in MatPlotLib is the logical model of a plot has grown organically over time. And so therefore, certain things work really well when you want to be interactive, but then other things were not really thought about in the context of interactivity and being able to change the properties very easily. And so therefore, like, we discovered that sometimes, like, setting like RC params on text, sometimes it takes effects, sometimes it doesn't, based on when in the script you write it in. We just weren't thinking about things like that when we were developing it. So it may need to take a fundamental revamping of the logical model of a plot to get there.
Phil?
If I can just be slightly less pessimistic about your question, actually, it wouldn't be that difficult to do for some limited properties. Right? You could easily click on a piece of text, and MatPlotLib has all the events that to pick that piece of text, and you could just change the font. Right? That's all we might expose. We might not allow you to set the random properties that I can't think of right now. But we could do a really limited scope quite easily, truthfully.
And if you ignore the problem, Nell's problem of serializing that or saving that again to the script, which you don't always need to do.
So you could save like all the configuration as a RC parameter file. So like allow to change all the defaults of MatPlotLib and save this as a configuration file, for example. But so that wouldn't address the problem of setting the title of a plot. It would just change like the looks. But it's pretty good already.
Yeah. I actually wanted to bring something else up. Who uses the function plot? Who absolutely, completely despises the interface that plot? Okay, I'm not alone. Can we please do something about this?
I would love to.
I feel like that exists so that MATLAB users transferring have something familiar. So the question really is then, the actual question is, do we care about that transition? Do we still want to keep it? Okay, there's lots of hands. Okay, so there was one here, and then Phil. So the curly hair, put your hand up. You.
Sorry, where?
Actually, before you do that, this gentleman here said, what is it that I don't like? What I don't like is, if you look at the documentation of plot, you can pass in the X array, Y array, or you can pass in the specific X, Y coordinate pairs. You can also pass in colors and line styles in various different ways.
And you can also get away with just specifying the Y values.
Yes, and then it will assume that the X is a range, 0 to n-1, for example. So it's not that plot is bad, I'm just saying we should have one way to call it.
Yeah, one of the things as I've been digging into the plot code, because I wanted to adjust the cycling features, was I still can't wrap my head around the logic of how it parses those arguments, and it's absolutely, utterly convoluted. And one of the things we discovered yesterday in the tutorial, but there actually was somewhat of a limitation. Some markers, for example, are numerical values, not string values, but the way you're supposed to specify your format is through a string. So how the heck are you supposed to say that it's a 7 something whatever? No, it just doesn't work.
Ben, the gentleman with the curly hair, put your hand up, please. Wave manically. Him. And then there's him, and then Phil and him. Okay. We don't have much time left because we have a time limit on this, but please, go ahead.
I'll keep it short, but in defense of plot, I completely agree that the code to parse the crazy number of different ways it will take arguments is a gigantic nightmare, and it takes a ridiculous number of different ways to specify the same thing. But there are a lot of MATLAB users, and at least in my opinion, I think that's, from what I've seen, the main convert to kind of scientific Python ecosystem is kind of more from MATLAB, and having that same interface, as terrible as it can be, is important to have around. That'd be my only comment.
I think we should write a second one.
Yeah, put it in MLab, exactly, yeah.
Okay, have an adjacent one. Okay. Ben, you, no? You same? No? Phil?
I don't think changing plot is going to happen as a signature. Right? I think it's there. It's not going anywhere. But plot generally produces a line, and we could quite happily have a method or a function called line.
That's, I think, what his point was too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Ben, to your left, blue shirt with his hand up. Yep.
This is a digression, so not about plot for a second.
That's okay.
Bit indifferent about it, but I was wondering if there's any interest in having MatPlotLib figures be converted to something like a JSON figure, because right now that's what Plotly does. It just turns it into a declarative JSON figure, and it wouldn't be hard for us to then go and write something that would take our JSON figure and dump out Python script in a certain way that would, for simple objects anyway, that would try to get back to that. Is that something that would be of interest or useful, or I don't know? The thought just occurred to me that that might be something that people might find useful.
Anybody want to respond to that? Thomas Caswell.
Yeah. I was just saying that sounds like a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah, there's sort of been a long-term project in my own head about sort of normalizing how the MatPlotLib objects work and having something that you could navigate like a DOM that would be consistent. But at this point, Plotly is already doing something very similar, and they've solved a lot of those problems in terms of how you represent it. So I wouldn't see any reason not to just use that, you know.
The only addition to that really is, I was thinking maybe like a JSON backend, basically. But the only problem with that concept is there's a lot of display logic that lives in MatPlotLib that, as a user, you can hook into. You can write Python code and you can modify the display logic. So as soon as you pump out to JSON, so when you drag your axes around, we have locators, right?
Okay.
You can control the locators of Python code. So as soon as you pump out into a JSON file, you've kind of lost that ability. But you could do a snapshot visualization. I just don't think kind of the interactive JSON afterwards is going to be quite as rich as a MatPlotLib figure.
Ladies and germs, if you have no more questions, there is a session starting in 4 minutes.
And we're all going to be around for this conference, so feel free at any time to talk to us about your thoughts, concerns, and of course, mailing list is a great resource to talk to us with, and publishing on issues on GitHub.
Yeah.
So
yeah, GitHub issues, mailing list. Mike, want to say anything?
Just announce the fact.
Use the mic, Mike.
We have a MatPlotLib sprint going on Friday and Saturday this week. So you don't have to have any experience whatsoever. We will help you get up to speed. In fact, that's one of the real purposes of it.
Last year was very successful.
Yeah, we got a lot of new people on board last year. Glad to help more people ramp up. That would be really great.
Actually, I do. Who has never compiled MatPlotLib? Or okay, awesome. So this is a great place to learn, to download the source code, compile it, and get used to it. So just listeners in addition.
All right.
Any other things? Come get stickers. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you guys for coming.
Yep.
Great hearing feedback from you guys.